Hi, everyone. Welcome to this next session. I hope you enjoyed the session that just followed. And we are ready here with Amanda Fletcher in the next session. My name is Kristen Smith. I'm a volunteer with the YWCA and part of the planning committee for this year's Leadership Summit. I'm going to begin by acknowledging the land that I'm meeting on. We begin this seminar by acknowledging the land on which we live and work is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe people, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis and Inuit people, and acknowledging reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous people. Some information about the YWCA. The YWCA Niagara Region is a local organization that stands for gender equality and gives a voice to those who are marginalized in our community. The YW offers emergency shelter and 3 stages of transitional housing to homeless women, men, and families to help its clients step by step break the cycle of homelessness and poverty for good. We have community guidelines for the sessions that are taking place, and we'd like to take this opportunity to remind everyone that our Niagara Leadership Summit for Women virtual event is designed to facilitate a safe and open space for all participants. By participating in this session, you are agreeing to follow our community guidelines. You can find the guidelines on the left-hand side menu under the Important Documents tab. We are all responsible for making an inclusive environment, and we appreciate your efforts in doing so. Now I'm pleased to introduce the session. Hi, I'm anxious. Please help me. According to the Canadian Mental Health Association, every Canadian will be affected by mental illness in some way, whether through personal experience or indirectly through a family member or close friend. Yet despite the prevalence and increased awareness of the issue, the stigma associated with mental health persists. With humor and heart, this seminar explores Amanda's struggle to overcome anxiety and depression on her zigzagging journey towards leadership. Attendees will learn about the transformative power of embracing yourself, warts and all, and the importance of creating a safe space for others to do the same. I am pleased to introduce you to today's speaker, Amanda Fletcher. A Niagara native and mental health advocate, Amanda Fletcher is a graduate of Brock University and Humber College. An anxiety sufferer from the age of 12, she is self-described social awkward and reluctant leader, whose unlikely journey into leadership continues to be a lesson in overcoming stigma and getting out of your own way. Amanda is currently Associate Director of Marketing for CAA Niagara and holds a certificate in professional leadership development from the Goodman School of Business. If throughout the seminar you have any questions, please post them in the question and answer tab, or you can send them to me directly. So by finding me as an attendee, Kristen Smith, and you can send it as a message if that's more convenient for you. Amanda does have a poll posted on the platform, but we ask that you hold off completing the poll until prompted by Amanda during the presentation. And don't forget to share your experience and learnings today on social media as we learn together throughout the next hour or so. Let's begin.
Thank you so much, Kristen. And thank you everyone for being here today. Welcome. I appreciate you taking the time this afternoon to spend the next hour or so with me. So before we get started, I do want to issue a trigger warning for anyone who may need it. As Kristen mentioned, we are going to be discussing issues pertaining to mental health, specifically anxiety and depression, and those are difficult concepts for many people. So if you need to excuse yourself at any point, please feel free to do so without any kind of fear of judgment. We do have to look after ourselves. So I have some visuals to share with you. So I'm going to share my screen here, and all being equal, it should go okay. All right, so as Kristen mentioned, my My presentation today is called Hello, I'm Anxious, Please Help Me. So really what I want to do today is in a comfortable and conversational way, talk about my journey through mental health. So let's get started. Let's start with why exactly are we here? Well, as I mentioned, I'm here to share with you my own personal experience with mental health, specifically anxiety and depression, how it has impacted my personal and professional lives, and how in spite of it, and maybe even because of it, I continue to rise. So a quick agenda so you know what to expect over the next hour or so, a little less than that. Bit more of an introduction about myself, so you'll learn a little bit more about me. We'll talk briefly about what anxiety is, and specifically the difference between anxiety and an anxiety disorder. I'll share my journey, and then we'll close out by talking a little bit about how we can continue to rise together, how we as a community can forward the conversation around mental health. So, starting at the beginning, who am I? And if you were in the previous seminar, this is probably going to look a little bit familiar to you. But so hopefully by now you know my name is Amanda. I'm currently Associate Director of Marketing at CAA Niagara. Prior to that, I worked on the marketing team at Penguin Canada, which is a large book publisher in Toronto. I graduated from Brock with a degree in English language and literature, and then completed a postgraduate certificate program at Humber College for creative book publishing with a specialization in marketing. I do hold a certificate in professional leadership development from the Goodman School of Business, and I am a Leadership Niagara alum. I was born in Hamilton, but raised in St. Catharines, and I now call Niagara Falls home. So that's who I am. Okay, rather, that's my resume. This picture is how I try to present myself to the world, as somebody who is confident and ambitious, a professional who has a clear path for her future and a plan. But as we all know, living in a world of social media, what we see on the surface is rarely an accurate reflection of what's actually going on beneath the surface. So who am I really? Well, this is probably a little bit more accurate. I'm an anxiety sufferer. So my life, like the hair in this picture, is messy. I am haunted by debilitating self-doubt, and oftentimes I have a hard time understanding exactly how I got to where I am in my career. So that's a little bit more about me. What I really want to do today is rip off the veil and give all of you an opportunity to see behind the curtain. I want to share with you the power of living and speaking your truth, because like most mental illnesses, anxiety is all about untruths, the untruths that we tell ourselves, the untruths that others believe, and the half-truths that we choose to show the world. So what exactly is anxiety? Well, we all experience it. It's a natural and important part of our body's defense system. Its sole purpose is to warn us of impending danger and to trigger our fight or flight mechanisms. Anxiety is simply fear packaged differently. Sensing a threat, our body prepares to either confront that threat or run from it. Adrenaline is unleashed, which gives us a sudden boost of energy. Our heart starts pounding in anticipation of physical exertion, and our blood flow is redirected to our lungs and major muscle groups. You want all of these things to happen if you're being pursued by a bear, for example, or a bighorn sheep, or an angry chicken. Your brain accurately predicts that you are under threat and triggers a response in your body to get you out of the way of that threat. An anxiety disorder, however, is a classic case of too much of a good thing. There are a number of different disorders, including generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, phobias, social anxiety, etc., but they all share a single characteristic. They all assess non-threatening situations as threatening and trigger within us strange, unusual, and frightening sensations. Oftentimes, these things happen at wildly inconvenient and random times, like when we're sitting at our desks, or riding a bus, or watching Netflix, or sleeping. When you have an anxiety disorder, even though there is no real threat, your body responds as though it's actually in danger. The adrenaline starts pumping, your heart starts pounding, and you have excessive and sometimes very confusing responses that leave you utterly exhausted once the quote unquote threat subsides. In my case, I can occasionally identify the trigger of my anxiety. Thankfully, public speaking isn't one of them, but flying, for example, will almost always spark my anxiety. An unfamiliar social situation where I don't know what's expected of me will do the same. But oftentimes, the symptoms and the responses come seemingly out of the blue. And that's one of the biggest challenges when it comes to anxiety. It's fluid. There is no one ailment, a lump, a bump, a rash, a pain that you can point to and say, that's the culprit, and set about fixing it. My anxiety is ever changing. And just when I think I have it all figured out, it likes to throw me a curveball. So there's no doubt that anxiety, I'd like to say that anxiety is a filthy liar. I'm not being pursued by an angry chicken, but my body seems to think that I am. But anxiety is also a very skilled mimic. The physical responses that you feel during an anxiety episode often resemble other medical conditions, the kinds of things that most people would probably seek medical attention about. So you might see things like racing or a pounding heart, lightheadedness or dizziness, tight chest or difficulty breathing, excessive sweating, or numbness or tingling in your hands or feet. Now, if you experience any of these sensations, odds are you might be thinking that you're experiencing a heart attack. Maybe you think you're having a pulmonary embolism. Maybe you think you're suffering from hyperthyroidism or angina or anemia. Maybe you think you have carbon monoxide poisoning, are experiencing a drug reaction. Maybe you think you have COVID. Odds are, if you experience these symptoms, anxiety likely isn't going to be high on your list. In fact, even now, when my anxiety triggers certain responses within my body, I question whether it actually is anxiety. What if there really is something wrong? Because after a while, you have a really hard time knowing what to believe. So just for fun, I thought I'd share with you some of the physical responses that my anxiety has triggered. And I can assure you that this is certainly not a comprehensive list, but at various times, my anxiety can manifest as either extreme heat or extreme cold. Today is an extreme cold day, just so that everyone is aware. It can lead to a loss of appetite, or it could spark compulsive eating. Sometimes I suffer from extreme fatigue that has me falling asleep at the drop of the hat. At other times, I have insomnia that leaves me awake for days on end. So it's pretty easy to see why anxiety can leave you guessing. It's never the same. No two anxiety episodes ever respond the same way. So some other very strange sensations that I've experienced over the years have included very red hands, but only my hands, excessive salivation, and aching bottom teeth. So I have to question, what exactly is my body preparing me for with those kinds of sensations and symptoms? I suppose we could explain the red hands by an increase in blood flow in anticipation of having to punch a shark in the face, say. But extra saliva and aching teeth, that's pretty unusual. So it keeps you on your feet. Throughout my life, various people, very well-meaning people, when they know that I'm experiencing an anxiety episode, have offered some wisdom, some advice. They'll say things like, just relax, calm down, think positively. You know there is no threat, so just stop worrying. I know that these comments are well-intentioned and the people who utter them are really trying to help. But the problem is when it comes to an anxiety disorder, it's not that simple. Sure, the average brain only weighs about 3 pounds and has the appearance and texture of a firm jelly mold, but it is an incredibly powerful machine. Just think of all the systems, processes, and mechanisms that our brain controls, from the tiniest flick of a smile muscle to the coordinated movement of large muscle groups. Our brain literally oversees every part of us. The brain consists of 100 billion neurons, roughly the same, roughly equal to the number of stars in the Milky Way. And those neurons can move information at speeds up to 400 kilometers an hour. In fact, a Japanese experiment in 2013 used 82,000 computer processors to simulate 1 second of human brain activity. 82,000 processors. And in comparison, the laptop that I'm hosting this webinar on has a total of 8 processors. Imagine how difficult it would be to stand up against something so powerful. Imagine the feeling of having no control over your own body, the fear of not knowing who or what to believe. Imagine feeling betrayed by your own brain. So how does somebody get to that point? Why does my brain go rogue when someone else's doesn't? There are a number of factors that might contribute to an anxiety disorder, and everybody really is different. But oftentimes it's this delightful mixture of genetics, upbringing, brain chemistry, trauma, personality, personal history, and lived experiences. And unfortunately, there is no cure, as much as I may wish there is one. There are tools and treatments to manage the symptoms of anxiety and to reduce the frequency and severity of panic attacks. But at the end of the day, this little goblin known as anxiety, well, it's going to be with me for the rest of my life. So at this point, before I dig into my own personal journey, I'm going to take a bit of a break, and I'm going to ask that everybody please complete the poll that is posted beside the chat box on EventMobi. And perhaps at this time, maybe if we have a question, I'll just ask Kristen if we have a question. Might be a good time for one.
Hi, Amanda. We do have a question that's come in by a messenger. Since symptoms of anxiety can be so similar to other medical conditions, how do you determine if it's anxiety or something potentially life-threatening?
So it's tough. It's really difficult to distinguish sometimes between a medical issue and anxiety. In the moment, those symptoms and sensations feel so real and so scary that I know a lot of people have actually gone to the hospital to get it checked out because they thought for sure they were having a heart attack or a stroke or something along those lines. Because I've lived with anxiety for so long, when I do feel something odd or potentially frightening, I'm more likely to assume that it is anxiety. But my suggestion is always, when in doubt, check it out. If you feel anything and you just know that it's not right, it's best to go in and see a medical professional. They can do some tests and they can rule out anything physically wrong. And then that way it's a lot easier to actually manage the symptoms themselves. So at this point, and if you have any other questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A section or in the chat. Kristen's going to be monitoring that. And hopefully, if I've timed this correctly, we'll have a little bit of time at the end to answer some additional questions. And thank you to everyone who participated in the poll. So I'm going to switch over here now just to see my little chat box. So the question was, have you or someone close to you, a family member, a friend, or a spouse, been impacted by mental illness? And you can see here that we've got 98% who are saying that, yes, they have in some way been impacted. That's a huge percentage of our attendees today. And I want you to keep that 98% in mind as we move forward, because we are going to be coming back to that in a few minutes. All right, so I'm going to switch back to the presentation. Hopefully things go the way they're supposed to. All right, and it looks like we're back in business. So, what has brought me here? What series of micro events has led to this moment where I'm sitting in a virtual room bearing my woefully broken soul to a group of strangers? I've always been a worrier. Even as a small child, I worried about things that other kids simply didn't think about. As soon as I heard about something potentially dangerous, I became worried about it. When a tornado warning flashed across the TV screen, I became convinced that a tornado was going to strike every time a thunderstorm kicked up. When my mom told me that she was clipping coupons to help save the family money, I became convinced that my parents were broke. I'm sure most people are probably familiar with Bernstein Bears, big figures in my life growing up. And when I was read Bernstein Bears Don't Talk to Strangers, I went from being an outgoing chatterbox to someone who ran away from everyone. Those lessons that are meant to protect children, I simply took to the extreme. In school, I became obsessed, and I use that word intentionally. I became obsessed with my grades, believing that a B in middle school geography was a gateway to a life of utter ruin and failure. I couldn't accept anything less than A's in all classes. But the truly disturbing part of it all was that the pressure that I was feeling was completely internal. There were no external influences pressuring me to perform. My parents were the show up, do your best, and we'll be proud of you kind of people. No, the standards I was trying to live up to were entirely my own. I didn't have many friends in school. I'm sure at this point you've probably figured out why. I wasn't attractive, I was in no way athletic, and I had zero musical talent. But I had my grades, and somewhere along the line, I convinced myself that that was all I had. I would stay up late at night, frantically trying to put the finishing touches on these elaborate 3D models and dioramas for assignments that called simply for a 3-page paper. My brother, who was himself a good student, would say to me, "Why are you doing so much more than what's asked of you? Why are you wasting your time?" And really, the only answer was that I did it because I couldn't not do it. Compulsive behavior is sometimes a byproduct of anxiety, and I have come to realize that I have my own unique compulsion. At the age of 12, I experienced my first panic attack at a candle shop in Niagara-on-the-Lake. It was summer and the shop was busy. People were pressed into the back of the store watching a candle making demonstration. The air felt so heavy with the heat and the people and the wax that I found myself seemingly unable to breathe. My heart started racing, my breathing was fast and shallow, and I sweat right through my Northern Getaway t-shirt. I was overcome with just a single thought: run. I needed to get out of there. So I sprinted through the shop and out onto the sidewalk, and my poor mom must have been absolutely terrified to turn around and realize that her preteen was no longer standing right beside her. But eventually she found me on the sidewalk and she helped me to breathe through my panic. Later that same summer, I had my second panic attack. It was not a good summer, but we were at Ontario Place. I was there with my brother and my mom and 2 friends when the sky over the lake started to darken. The temperature dropped suddenly and the wind picked up. And of course, I became convinced that a tornado was imminent. I was standing at the concession stand with my brother. I think we were ordering hot dogs. And all of a sudden, I found myself unable to see or hear. My ears were plugged and these big black blobs were creeping across my field of vision. The hot dog man was asking me something, probably whether or not I wanted ketchup or mustard, and I was frozen. I simply couldn't hear anything. My brother, who was my older brother, was going, Mandy, answer the man, thinking that I was being rude, but I just stood there confused and scared. Shortly thereafter, in grade 8, things came to a head. Basically, all of the pressure that I put on myself to achieve the highest marks in school simply became too much. I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping, I looked tired and sick. My teacher at the time noticed something was amiss, called up my mom and said that I needed 2 weeks off of school. No homework. Well, that might seem like a great deal for most people in grade 8, but for me and my fear of failure, not being able to do my homework was actually a bit of a punishment. Nevertheless, he identified that I needed a break. And I've now identified that grade 8 represents my first depression, precipitated by my inability to measure up to my own impossibly high standards. So over the years, anxiety and depression have remained a constant in my life, still tied to my low sense of self-worth and my fear of failure. And over the years, I have come to understand the 11 herbs and spices that make up my own unique blend of anxiety. And lucky for you guys, I'm going to share that secret recipe with you today. So the recipe starts off with 3 parts: generalized anxiety disorder, sometimes called GAD. 1 part social anxiety, and 2 parts panic disorder. Take those ingredients, mix them well, pour them into an Instapot if you have one. If you're trendy and you've got an Instapot, fantastic. But really, any old pressure cooker will do. Lock down the lid, crank her up to 11, and in no time flat, you'll have your very own Amanda. Couple of notes about the recipe: not great at potlucks, but will keep in the fridge for 33 years. So what does all of this really mean? Well, what it means is I essentially live with low-level anxiety all day, every day. Social situations and new interactions are particularly challenging. And every once in a while, the whole mixture comes to a roiling boil and explodes into a full-blown head between the knees, huffing into a paper bag panic attack. So, okay, that's a little bit of an exaggeration. I haven't actually breathed into a paper bag, but I'm assuming that breathing into a mask is pretty much the same. So you can imagine, given all of this, that when it came time to contemplating my career, I naturally assumed leadership's off the table. I mean, how could anybody see potential in me to be a leader? And if they did find out that I had a mental illness that occasionally left me utterly paralyzed, well, they'd rip that title away from me so fast, my career would be ruined and I would be a failure. Yet now I'm in a position where I actually get to lead a team of 6 marketing and communications professionals. And all signs seem to point to I'm not that bad at it. So how did we wind up at that point? How in the world did that happen? Well, oddly enough, I have to thank the very thing that I was convinced would hold me back: my anxiety. A few years ago, I was presented with the opportunity to attend Leadership Niagara. My organization was going to pay for my enrollment, and the program was going to introduce me to key concepts related to leadership and really broaden my horizons when it came to community leadership opportunities. My organization had somewhere along the line identified me as high leadership potential, which at the time baffled me. I couldn't understand how they could have identified me as high leadership potential. Unfortunately, despite my disbelief, my anxiety disorder, my social anxiety, prevents me from actually saying no to these kinds of opportunities. So I reluctantly agreed to attend the program. It was only after several days of panicking over the thought of meeting new people and working with them and feeling woefully underqualified to be considered a leader at any point that I finally decided I was going to have to tell my company that I simply couldn't attend the program. I couldn't fathom embarking on that path. So finally, I worked up the courage to email my director of HR and say that I was going to have to respectfully bow out when I received an email from Leadership Niagara the very same day. And it basically said, "Congratulations, your tuition has been paid. We can't wait to see you in September." Oh, shit. Now I'm in a real pickle, because the only thing worse than saying no thank you in the very beginning was to have to go back to my organization and ask them to ask for a refund because I chickened out of a commitment. So my social anxiety was, at that particular point in time, trumped by my fear of disappointing somebody. So, covered in anxiety hives and sweating through my blazer, I attended Leadership Niagara. And I can say unequivocally that it was a turning point in my personal and professional life. Because it was during my time in the program that if I stood 10 feet away and squinted, I might actually be able to see myself as a leader. After that, leaders and other mentors saw in me what I was still struggling to see in myself and worked to help foster my confidence. And along the way, I managed to acquire a couple of employees who reported to me. It started with 1 and 2s and 3 and so on. And along the way, I came to a realization. There were 2 things that I learned about leadership. Number 1 is that I actually enjoy leadership. Don't get me wrong, I'm still full of anxiety. And now I really have like a lot of things to worry about and sometimes really big things to worry about. But at the end of the day, I love seeing my team work together to achieve common goals. I learn from them every day and I'm inspired by them. And the second thing that I've learned about leadership is that I'm actually not terrible at it. I still spend a lot of time in my head and I still question my experiences and my instinct. But I've also come to realize that some of the things that I've battled the most in my career and in my life are actually things that help to make me a stronger leader. So for example, my fear of failure means that I care deeply about my team, about my organization. I do not want to let them down. My fear of being judged means that I am rarely the first person to speak up. But when I do, I tend to be careful and tactful, respectful, and diplomatic. I'm a classic overthinker. You can bet that in any given situation, I have evaluated every possible worst case scenario. But the other side of that means that I'm pretty good at weighing the risks. And I'm actually pretty good in a crisis. Because I've experienced my own personal struggles, I'm now able to talk to others about their struggles with empathy and compassion, and I'm a great listener. I am on high alert all the time. I have a very high awareness of social cues because I don't really know what's expected of me all the time, and that puts me on edge. But because I'm on high alert, I'm also quite perceptive. So I'm able to identify those things that aren't being said, and I'm able to read between the lines. And because I have this weird and wonderful story to tell, I'm in a position to help others. And that's really what today is all about. And that's why I'm telling you all of this. I'm telling you all of this knowing that if we ever do meet in person, you'll know exactly how uncomfortable I am. Knowing that you'll know I will have forgotten your name as soon as you told me because I'll have been too busy looking for the nearest exit. I'm sharing my story today because you may not have heard one like it, but I can assure you it's far from unique. So let's think back to the poll. 98% of the attendees of this seminar had indicated that they were in some way impacted by mental health. That is a huge, huge percentage. Now, many of the most recent mental health statistics are already a few years old, but I think it's important to still share them. So these are from 2013, which is essentially the most recent statistics that we have, but it's estimated, or at that time it was estimated, that 50% of Canadians will have or will have had a mental illness by the age of 40. Hi, I'm one of them now. Yet 60% of those indicated that they would not seek help for fear of being labeled. So why is that? Well, in 2013, 46% of Canadians thought that people used the term mental illness as an excuse for bad behavior. 42% were unsure whether they would socialize with a friend who has a mental illness. And 64% of Ontario workers said that they would be concerned about how work would be affected if a colleague had a mental illness. As I said earlier, these statistics are several years old, and there have been great strides made in erasing or reducing the stigma associated with mental health, but we are still a long, long way from erasing it entirely. So what can we do as a community to help keep the conversation going? What can we do to ensure that those who are suffering from a mental illness feel safe and empowered to speak up and seek help? How can we help our community rise? So there are a number of things that we can do. As leaders or employers, we can learn to read between the lines, understanding that the nonverbal cues are often the ones that are going to let you know if there's something truly amiss. We can build our toolbox of resources and techniques to help our employees and those around us deal with mental illness. There's something called mental health first aid. And if you visit mhfa.ca, you'll find lots of resources there designed to help leaders and employers navigate mental health in the workplace. And we can recognize the strengths. Yes, anxiety, mental health, mental illness brings with it a number of challenges. But if we can recognize the strength in those individuals and foster them in the same way that my mentors and leaders saw it in myself, we can accomplish truly amazing things. In our day-to-day lives, there are plenty of things that we can do to help our friends and family members who may be experiencing or dealing with a mental illness. One of the hardest, but probably most impactful, is we can run towards and not away. We're programmed to be afraid of mental illness, to think it's dangerous because it's uncomfortable, and sometimes we don't know how to deal with it. But if we can overcome our own discomfort and our own fear and support those who need it the most, then we can really change their lives, because after all, they're the ones who are the most frightened. We can check in and listen, which includes avoiding the urge to advise. We want to try and fix it, especially if it's a loved one that we're watching struggle. But really, the best thing that we can do is just be there to listen and to ask questions. How are you feeling? What do you need right now? What can I do for you? And we can normalize medication and therapy. I look forward to the day when we can talk about going to see our therapist with the same casualness that we talk about going to the dentist or to the chiropractor. The more we talk about it, the less shame others are going to feel about having to use those services. So for anybody who is experiencing mental illness themselves, some of the things that have helped me over the years have included assembling my squad of advocates. This could include friends, family members, could be medical professionals, but these are the people who will close ranks around you when things get messy, who will provide the support, and who will also oftentimes push you towards the help and the support and resources that you need. Find the tools, techniques, systems that work for you and use them unapologetically. So for me, for example, I know that if I'm going into a new social situation and I don't know what's expected of me, I'm going to ask a lot of questions. What time does it start? What time does everybody arrive? What's the dress code? What does the agenda look like? What are the seating arrangements? Will there be a dog there for me to pet? All of these things help me feel more in control of my situation. And so my recommendation has always been figure out what your systems are and just use them without feeling guilty. And if you can find the courage to speak your truth, do so, because as soon as you allow yourself and accept yourself and give yourself permission to speak about your experiences, then you're actually giving others permission to do the same. Anytime that I've spoken up about my own struggles, I'm always amazed at how many people afterwards will come and say, you know what, I know someone who's going through something, or I've gone through it myself. And finally, this is my all-time favorite quote from Elizabeth Gilbert. Embrace the glorious mess that you are. I try my very best to keep this in mind as I move forward and I learn and I grow. Sometimes I forget it, but I do try to keep it in mind because it's a great reminder that we are all glorious messes, whether we suffer from a mental illness or not. No one is perfect, and realizing that is very empowering. So over the years, people have told me that my anxiety disorder doesn't define me. Well, the funny thing is, it kind of does. It's a part of me. It's a part of me in the same way that my brown eyes and freckles are a part of me. It's a part of me in the same way that my love of sugar and hatred of exercise are a part of me. As much as I may wish it, my anxiety has informed how I see the world, how I interact with others, and how I react in certain situations. It's not easy, and there are many, many times when I wish that I could change that part of myself. But I always have to pause and reflect. If I eliminated my anxiety, what other parts of myself, the empathy, the compassion, the strength, the drive, would I also be giving away? So a bit of a confession, there are some people in my company who know that I have an anxiety disorder. Others don't, many don't, in fact, and some of them I believe are actually watching today. So I don't know how things might change after today, but I do know that if speaking up and sharing my experience gives someone the safe space to do the same, then all of it will be worth it. So I want to thank you for taking the time and spending the last hour or so with me. I put some resources up here on the screen. They're also available through the app. And I would love to field some questions if you have them.
Amanda, we do have a question that's come in. Knowing how anxious you were about it, how did you cope during your Leadership Niagara experience? What did you do to overcome your anxiety?
It's interesting, actually. So I mentioned the anxiety hives, which for me is a very real symptom of anxiety. So many people who know me know that if I'm in an uncomfortable situation, I'll turn red. It usually starts on my neck and then creeps up into my face. So you can imagine I was blown out in anxiety hives ahead of time. And really, it was about figuring out and identifying the systems that I knew would work for me in that instance. So one of those things includes showing up really early. So I arrived for day one of Leadership Niagara, and I want to say I was probably 45 minutes early. The venue wasn't even open. The organizers weren't even there. And I was sitting out in my car trying to psych myself up. I thought at one point, well, maybe I could just leave and get a coffee, but I also realized then I'd be pushing it and I didn't want to be late. So I was the first one there. And then I, in fact, helped to carry in some of the supplies for the event organizer. Then we got inside and I realized there's one thing that people who have social anxiety dread. It's the words assigned seating. So we were assigned to a seat at the table. That was going to be our seat for the rest of the 2-day event. And so when I sat down at the table, I made myself a promise that I was going to push myself to speak to at least one new person at each of the sessions. So it was a year long and it was a session a month. And so I pushed myself to do those things. And I knew it was going to be uncomfortable, and it was. Like I said, I sweat through my blazer many times over. And by the end of the day, I was absolutely exhausted. But by giving myself small goals, little things that other people probably would think was no problem at all, I was able to overcome some of that fear and that anxiety, and feel like I could actually maybe do this.
Excellent. We have another question that's come in, so I'm just checking my other monitor. What suggestions do you have when bringing up your anxiety for the first time with coworkers or in a professional setting?
So whether this is the best approach for everybody, I'm not sure, but my approach tends to just be come right out with it. Those who are perceptive probably know that I'm maybe struggling in certain situations and can pick up on it. But oftentimes, now that I've gotten more comfortable with speaking up about it, I'll just come right out and say it, and identify that this is something that I have, and there are certain things that I need to do in order to make myself feel comfortable. And it's intimidating, certainly, especially in a professional environment. There is still that question of whether or not somebody is going to think that I'm ill-equipped to do the job because I have an anxiety disorder. But there comes a point when you realize, whether they realized it ahead of time or not, I've been doing my job, I've been doing it well, and that doesn't change as soon as somebody finds out that I have an anxiety disorder. So I put the onus back on them to accept me as I am, and to understand that there are certain things that I may need to do, but that I am still perfectly qualified to do the job, and in some cases maybe very qualified. There are times when my disorder actually winds up being a strength. So for me, it's just ripping the Band-Aid off, and like, that might not work for everybody, but that's how I've approached it.
All right, we have a number of questions coming in. How did you know that your mentors were authentic?
That is a tough one, and as somebody who has an anxiety disorder, I don't know whether it's actually tied to the anxiety disorder or it's just my personality, but I have trust issues anyway. So it's hard for me to get close to somebody just naturally. And so there's a lot of times when somebody who winds up being a mentor in my life is somebody who has worked with me for a long time, and not necessarily in a mentorship capacity, but over time, their actions have demonstrated to me that they're somebody I can trust. So they follow through on their promises. They keep confidences. They aren't afraid of emotion. They understand how to navigate difficult conversations. So once I identified that that was a safe space for me, I trusted them. But certainly when I was first given the opportunity of going to Leadership Niagara, there were a lot of things going through my head, like why would they choose me? What's their ulterior motive? But at the end of the day, you do have to trust people. And once you start to do that, it's a lot easier.
There is a question. Do you think perfectionism and/or few failures, high achievements leads to anxiety?
It's hard to say, and there's lots of research out there from a medical and a psychological perspective. I think for me, it's part and parcel. It's hard to say which came first, the anxiety or the perfectionism. I've identified age 12 as really the point when it became obvious that maybe I had something a little bit more to deal with. But because it's so ingrained in genetics and personal experience and history and things like that, it's really hard to say whether the one caused the other. There are a lot of people in the world who are type A or perfectionists who don't necessarily have the same challenges So that's where it gets a little bit hazy, because it's hard to say whether one came first and how they inform each other. But I certainly know that my fear of failure and perfectionism is tied inherently to my anxiety. And when I'm faced with the prospect of potentially not being perfect, which, let's face it, is all day, every day, that's when the anxiety really kind of starts to ramp up for me.
Amanda, you are doing an amazing job fielding these questions coming in to you. So this is an appropriate one around the timing. What are some ways you challenge your anxiety now?
Oh my goodness. See, that is funny, and I like the use of the word challenge, because I would say that for a very long time, and still occasionally, it's not so much me challenging my anxiety as it is sometimes running from it. There is still that instinct to try and hide and to avoid the situations that are likely to spark some sort of anxiety. So a great example of how I'm challenging it, for better or worse, being here today. I threw my hat in the ring in terms of applying to be a speaker for the summit this year. I was feeling particularly confident that day, and as soon as I found out that I'd been selected, I almost immediately regretted it, because I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to put myself out there in front of all of these people. But doing it and having received the support, it has helped to enhance my confidence in myself, and hearing the questions that are coming in makes me think that maybe this is part of a conversation that needs to be had. You start to worry at first if this is a story that is really worth sharing, that anybody would actually want to hear. So doing things like this, pushing myself, taking those opportunities. Now, if I'm presented with an opportunity like a Leadership Niagara kind of thing, but later now in my career, I'm less likely to immediately think I can't do this, but to instead say, this is an opportunity to push myself. And don't get me wrong, I'm not good at it sometimes, and that's where my advocates, my squad of advocates, are there to push me and to give me that nudge and to say, you absolutely can do this. Which is exactly what they've been doing all day today. My phone's been blowing up with those well wishes. So always just trying to find those new opportunities and resist that urge to hide.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you for showing up and being here. I do add, there is one final question, but I'll also leave the door open in case there's an easier way to post it. I think it's speaking to the power of your presentation to resonate with people. Could you go back to your slide about the flip side of having an anxiety disorder? I'd love to share the positive take with others who suffer from anxiety. So I'm wondering if perhaps there's a way that we can share that in another format on the platform. Might be a way to do that as opposed to flipping back, but just wanted to give you the option to respond to that.
So I didn't post my presentation initially because, again, probably thought, well, I don't know if anybody's going to be really interested. So I will post it as one of the documents on EventMobi, so that you'll be able to, I'll do it right after this, so you'll be able to refer back to it if you'd like. And thank you, everyone, for your questions. This is fantastic, and I'm available, of course, if you have any other questions and maybe want to chat directly.
Excellent. Yes, I'd like to give a thank you on behalf of the participants. I know you'll get a chance to go back through the chat. Very active people resonating with what you were saying, the message that you're giving with a great sense of humor as well. So thank you so much for sharing today. And thank you everyone for attending today's session. We are clipping right along and right on time. So we have about 5 minutes before the next panel starts. So I'd encourage you, it's the How I Rise My Leadership Journey. You'll hear from 4 inspiring women, and that will begin at 3 o'clock. In the meantime, you can take a break. We encourage you to connect with fellow attendees with the one-on-one chat feature, contribute to group discussions, meet some of the local organizations in the virtual booths page, visit our sponsors' virtual booths, complete the challenge and earn points for a chance to win a prize. and connect with Amanda as a speaker. It seems like this is just the start of the conversation moving forward. So thank you again, Amanda, for your time and energy and sharing your personal story with us. It's been really inspirational. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.